Some people wake up tired, without having made any physical effort at all. Their body got out of bed, but their mind woke up already fighting. Fighting with what someone said, with what they did not say, with what might happen, with what should have happened, with the injustice still stuck in the chest, with the rejection that still burns, with a future that offers no guarantees, with a past that refuses to be changed. And from the outside, most of the time, no one notices, because this war makes no noise. It happens in overthinking, in the need to predict, in the constant attempt to avoid pain, in the obsession with keeping everything under control. But there comes a point when this stops being prudence and becomes a prison. You begin by only wanting to protect yourself. Then, little by little, you are trying to control people, control responses, control outcomes, control how you will be seen, control the timing of life, control even the inevitable. And then peace disappears, because peace cannot breathe inside a mind that demands from the world an obedience the world never promised. Maybe that is your pain today. Maybe you are suffering not only because of what happened, but because you cannot accept that it was never truly under your command. Maybe what has exhausted you is not life itself, but the draining fantasy that if you think hard enough, insist enough, worry enough, love enough, predict enough, you will somehow manage to prevent pain, but you will not. And that is not pessimism. That is liberation. Because life begins to feel lighter when you understand one simple, harsh, and deeply healing truth. There are things that ask for action, and there are things that ask for acceptance. Confusing these two is one of the greatest sources of human suffering. Today, I want to lead you through that crossing. I want to show you why so many people live emotionally overloaded. I want to show you the invisible mistake that destroys serenity. I want to show you why stoicism remains so alive, so current, and so necessary. And above all, I want to show you how to stop suffering over what was never yours to control. So write this in the comments now. Honestly, without performance, without empty, pretty words. I release what I cannot control. Write it like someone making a pact with their own sanity. Because maybe your healing will not begin when life gets organized. Maybe it will begin when you stop demanding that life organize itself your way. There is a very common and very destructive illusion. The illusion that suffering is caused only by circumstances. No, many times, suffering does not come only from the circumstance. It comes from resistance to the circumstance. One thing is the pain of the fact. Another thing is the mental torture of wanting to undo the fact. One thing is being disappointed. Another thing is spending weeks, months, sometimes years, mentally negotiating with something that has already happened. One thing is feeling the loss. Another thing is turning that loss into an inner altar, where the mind returns every day to worship its own powerlessness. That difference changes everything, because it reveals that not all suffering comes from outside. Much of it comes from the clash between reality and the internal demand that reality should have been different. A person says they suffer because they were rejected, but sometimes they suffer even more because they cannot accept not having had the power to be chosen. They say they suffer because the plan failed. But often what destroys them is realizing that effort does not buy guarantees. They say they suffer because of criticism. But many times, the deeper wound is discovering that they do not control other people's opinions. Notice this carefully. Imanikazisa is not only the event that hurts, it is the collapse of the fantasy of control. And the ego suffers greatly when it discovers its own limits, because the ego likes to believe that if it does everything right, life will obey. That if it loves the right way, it will be loved back. That if it works hard enough, it will be recognized at the expected time. That if it is good, the world will be fair. That if it thinks a little more, it will find the exact way to prevent pain. But life does not work like that. And it does not work like that, not because it is cruel. It works like that because it is real. Reality does not revolve around our desire. Time does not speed up because we are ready. People do not feel according to our need. The past does not return because we learned the lesson. The future does not come with a signed contract. That is why the teaching of Epictetus is so precise. Some things depend on us, others do not. It sounds small, but it is an inner revolution, because suddenly you realize that you are wasting too much energy where you have no rule, and investing too little energy where you truly do have responsibility. You want to control how others look at you, but you do not control your own reaction. You want to control whether someone stays, but you do not govern your own attachment. You want to control the outcome, but you neglect your posture. You want to control tomorrow, but you cannot hold the now. You want to control circumstances, but you abandon the discipline of the mind. This inversion makes people sick. They live tense, hypervigilant, emotionally drained, because they are trying to manage territories that do not belong to them. And the most dangerous part is that this often looks like maturity. It looks like they are careful. It looks like they care. It looks like they are responsible. But many times, what is really happening is anxiety dressed as virtue. They call attachment love. They call control care. They call fear diligence. They call the inability to accept uncertainty strength. And so, the mind grows heavy. Maybe you know this place well. That feeling that if you let go, everything will collapse. That needs to review a conversation 20 times. That urge to anticipate every possible scenario. That exhaustion from trying to understand every silence, every gesture, every shift in tone. That habit of imagining bad possibilities so you can prepare. That compulsion to figure out what to do so no one leaves. So nothing goes wrong. So no pain catches you unprepared. But this strategy never delivers what it promises, because it promises safety, and it delivers weariness. It promises protection, and it delivers exhaustion. It promises control, and it delivers slavery. The more you try to control what cannot be controlled, the more vulnerable you become, because your peace begins to depend precisely on what you cannot dominate. And that is a silent way of handing your life over to chaos. Marcus Aurelius understood this in a deeply human way. He was not a philosopher in a laboratory, far removed from the tensions of the world. He was a man immersed in pressure, war, illness, politics, losses, immense responsibilities. And even so, he returned again and again to the same inner discipline. Take care of what is yours, accept what is not. Do not turn the inevitable into permanent revolt. Do not demand from the world what the world does not owe. Do not be dragged by external events as if your soul belonged to them. Look at the greatness of that. This is not about coldness. This is not about becoming stone. This is not about not feeling. It is about not abandoning yourself. And that point is central, because many people think acceptance means giving up. But acceptance is not giving up. Acceptance is stopping the lie you tell yourself about what is happening. Acceptance is recognizing the structure of reality. Acceptance is looking at the fact without adding fantasy, revolt, dramatization, and childish demand. Acceptance is saying, this happened, this hurts, this is not what I wanted. But even so, it is what it is. That sentence spoken with maturity already saves an immense amount of psychic energy, because the mind stops spending force-fighting existence. It returns to using strength to respond better to existence. There's natural pain in life. That is inevitable. Being misunderstood hurts. Losing someone hurts. Failing hurts. Being betrayed hurts. Not being seen hurts. Watching a plan collapse hurts. Discovering that you do not have the control you imagined hurts. But there is an extra pain. A built pain. A fed pain. A pain that is born from the refusal to accept that reality never signed a contract with our will. It is this extra pain that destroys peace. It is this extra pain that makes a person replay the scene 1,000 times. That makes a person insist on what is already over. That makes a person humiliate themselves, trying to change the inevitable. That turns thought into a machine of torture. That makes a person hand the whole present over to the past or to the fear of the future. This extra pain does not come from life. It comes from resistance. And this may be one of the greatest invitations of Stoicism. Stop adding suffering to suffering. Life is already heavy. Do not also carry the weight of a useless war against what does not depend on you. But to do that, you need courage. Because giving up the illusion of control requires more courage than continuing to try to control everything. Control gives a false sense of power. Even when it is destroying you inside, it still feels like you are doing something. It still feels like you are trying. It still feels like if you insist a little more, you will manage to avoid the blow. That is why many people cling to suffering, because suffering gives the impression of continuity. It gives the impression that you have not let go yet. It gives the impression that there is still something in your hands, but sometimes there is not. And maturity begins when you can bear that truth without collapsing. There are things you will not solve. There are people you will not convince. There are relationships you will not save by yourself. There are seasons you will not speed up. There are explanations you will not receive. There are losses you will not prevent. There are judgments you will not stop. That does not diminish you, it pluses you. And being placed in reality is much better than being grand only in fantasy. Because the human being suffers greatly when imagining themselves omnipotent, when believing that everything should yield to their dedication, when thinking every bad outcome is an error that must be corrected, when treating uncertainty as a moral failure. Life is not a system of automatic reward. It does not distribute guarantees in proportion to our emotional effort. And here there is a deep liberation. You do not need to control everything in order to live with dignity. You do not need to control other people's behavior to preserve your integrity. You do not need to control the future to act wisely in the present. You do not need to control approval to keep your worth. You do not need to control the final outcome to do what is right now. That gives you your center back, because it removes you from dependence on the external and returns you to the building of the internal and what is inside. Yes, asks for work. Your reaction asks for work. Your discipline asks for work. Your interpretation asks for work. Your ability to bear frustration asks for work. Your tendency to dramatize asks for work. Your impulse to control asks for work. Your attachment to guarantees asks for work. Do you see the contrast? You cannot govern the world, but you can. Little by little, govern yourself better within it. And that is the only form of freedom that cannot be easily taken from you. There is a sentence that should be carried to the center of life. What you do not accept controls you, because what you do not accept continues to occupy space. It continues pulling your attention. It continues altering your mood. It continues defining your thoughts. It continues organizing your impulses. It continues demanding energy. You say you want to forget, but you do not accept. You say you want to move on, but you continue negotiating. You say you want peace, but you still feed the fantasy that one day you will change what already was. Shape what does not depend on you. Guarantee what was never guaranteed. As long as that continues, your mind will remain trapped. Acceptance is a form of inner closure. It does not mean the pain will disappear immediately. It does not mean the wound will close at once. It does not mean you will like what happened. It only means that you stop cooperating with the disturbance, and that already changes the entire path. Seneca said that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and few sentences remain so current. Think carefully about how many times in your day pain came from a concrete fact, and how many times it came from an interpretation. How many times you were truly hurt, and how many times you only imagined the blow before it happened. How many times reality was simple, but your mind turned it into catastrophe. How many times a silence became rejection, a delay became abandonment, a criticism became total invalidation, a mistake became proof of total failure. The undisciplined mind has talent for exaggerating the weight of things, not because it is evil, but because it is trying to protect. The problem is that many times it protects by producing more suffering than the fact itself would produce. It is like someone so afraid of rain that they build a house so sealed that they can no longer breathe. That is what happens when you try to control everything. You lose air. You no longer live. You monitor. You no longer feel. You track. You no longer trust. You calculate. You no longer love. You manage risk. You no longer walk. You try to map the entire ground before taking one step. But life was not made to be lived like that. Life requires presence. And presence is incompatible with the obsession for absolute control. Because presence asks for an encounter with the now, and absolute control asks for dominion over what has not happened yet. Presence asks for rootedness. Control asks for anticipation. Presence asks for relationship with the real. Control asks for the fantasy of safety. That is why so many people are mentally absent from their own lives. They are at home, but inwardly they are already in some future scenario. They are in a conversation, but inside they are reviewing the past. They are living an ordinary day, but emotionally they are already suffering over 10 possibilities that may never exist. This kind of existence exhausts the soul, and it has an even more serious consequence. Whoever tries to control everything stops developing an essential capacity, the capacity to endure. This is very important, because a strong mind is not a mind that eliminates all uncertainty. It is a mind that does not collapse in the face of uncertainty. A strong mind is not one that guarantees nothing will hurt. It is one that knows how to cross pain without being completely deformed by it. A strong mind is not one that makes the world obey. It is one that keeps direction even when the world does not obey. That difference seems subtle, but it transforms the way of living. Maybe for a long time, you associated peace with control. Maybe you believed you would only be able to rest when everything was resolved, defined, safe, predictable. Maybe you told yourself that after that thing falls into place, then you will breathe. After that person replies, then you will be okay. After that problem ends, then you will have peace. After you get certainty, then you will rest. But life will always bring another variable, another delay, another fear, another change, another risk, another ending, another beginning. If your peace depends on total control, it will never arrive, because total control never arrives. Mature peace is born somewhere else. It is born when you learn to remain whole in the middle of imperfection. It is born when you accept that life moves without asking permission. It is born when you stop demanding guarantees in order to act. It is born when you understand that serenity is not the absence of chaos. It is the presence of center. And how is that center built? First, through distinction. You need to learn to ask, does this depend on me, or does it only touch my desire? That question seems simple, but it cuts away half of useless anguish. Because many things that feel urgent are only emotionally loud. The mind says you need to solve them. But in truth, you only need to endure them. The mind says you need to understand everything. But in truth, you only need to accept that. Not everything will be explained. The mind says you need to insist a little more. But in truth, you are only postponing grief. The mind says you need to control. But in truth, you need to mature. To discern that is liberating. There are moments when action is necessary. You need to speak. You need to take a stand. You need to cut off a cycle. You need to change a habit. You need to do your work. You need to repair what can be repaired. You need to move away from what destroys you. You need to assume responsibility for what is in your hands. But there are moments when no action changes the fact, and insisting only deepens the inner humiliation. That is where acceptance enters. Accepting that the other person does not want to, accepting that that season has passed, accepting that the answer will not come, accepting that recognition has been delayed, accepting that the loss happened, accepting that the plan failed, accepting that you have no control over the rhythm of life. Acceptance does not weaken you. Acceptance places your strength where it belongs. Because while you fight the inevitable, you lose energy for the possible. Another thing that needs to be said firmly, you do not control what others feel for you. It may hurt to hear that, but it can also liberate you deeply. You can be honest and still be misunderstood. You can love and still not be loved back. You can do your best and still not be enough for someone. You can offer presence, effort, loyalty, care, and still watch a relationship change, cool, or end. That does not necessarily mean you failed. It simply means the human heart is not a mechanism that responds predictably to our deserving. Many people suffer because they have turned affection into a project of control, as if loving properly guaranteed permanence, as if being good guaranteed reciprocity, as if reshaping yourself, yielding, insisting, proving your value, waiting longer, enduring Mari could finally produce the behavior you want in the other person, but the other person remains the other person with their freedom, with their limits, with their confusions, with their choices, with their inability. Sometimes to offer what you expect. And when you try to control that, you lose twice. You lose your peace and you lose yourself. Because you begin to live according to signs. You interpret everything. You monitor everything. You'll make yourself smaller to fit. You stay silent so as not to drive them away. You insist so as not to lose them. And in the process, you abandon your own dignity. That is not mature love. It is fear of loss, disguised as devotion. Mature love knows how to offer, but it also knows how to recognize the limit of its own influence. It knows how to care without trying to govern. It knows how to be present without begging for permanence. It knows how to value without erasing itself. It knows how to let go when it realizes it has already entered the territory of emotional humiliation. And this applies not only to romantic relationships, it applies to family, it applies to friendships, it applies to work, it applies to recognition. It applies to any situation in which you are suffering more from lack of control than from the fact itself. We also need to look at the past. Many people live emotionally handcuffed to what has already happened. An old conversation, a wrong choice, a mistake, a betrayal, an omission, a loss, a humiliation, a moment when they did not react as they wished they had, a season when they could not see themselves clearly, an opportunity they let pass. And the mind keeps returning, as if inner repetition could produce repair, as if excessive guilt were a form of rewriting history, as if revisiting the mistake 1,000 times were an act of responsibility. But it is not. Imani Kaziz, it is just mental self-violence. You cannot act again yesterday. You cannot go back with today's awareness into yesterday's body. You cannot correct the past inside the past. You can only learn now. You can only respond now. You can only mature now. The past is useful when it becomes a lesson. When it becomes identity, prison, or sentence, it stops teaching and begins devouring. That is why some people do not move forward. They are not only remembering, they are trying to retroactively control what is already dead, and that drains life. Every time you demand from the past a possibility of change, you weaken the present. Every time you turn regret into permanent residence, You stop using the now as a field of reconstruction. Stoicism does not invite you to erase the past. It invites you to close it as a field of action. It is no longer a field of action. It is a field of learning that changes your posture. You stop obsessively asking, why was it like that? And begin asking, what do I do with this from here on? You stop torturing yourself for not having been who today you have learned to become. You stop demanding retroactive perfection. You stop idolizing an idealized version of yourself and begin to build with humility the possible and honest version of yourself now. And then life starts moving again. We also need to look at the future, because the future is one of the greatest kidnappers of peace. Not because the future itself is evil, but because the anxious mind turns it into a stage of threats. You begin by predicting, then you start anticipating, then you begin suffering, then you start living in a state of alert over things that may never happen. It is astonishing how a human being can wear themselves out over imaginary scenarios, lose sleep over possibilities, lose presence over anticipations, lose energy over hypotheses, lose joy over fears that have not even taken shape yet. And all of it because they believe that by thinking more, they will be more prepared. Sometimes they may be a little more informed, but almost never more at peace. Because overthinking and thinking well are not the same thing. Thinking well organizes action. Overthinking multiplies anguish. Thinking well leads you to ask, what can be done now? Overthinking makes you spin in circle. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? What if I cannot bear it? What if everything collapses? Do you see the difference? One kind of thinking builds, the other consumes. That is why one of the most important trainings is to notice when the mind has left reflection and entered rumination, when it has stopped seeking clarity and started feeding fear, when it has stopped preparing with wisdom and begun manufacturing despair. Not every thought deserves lodging. Not every worry deserves credit. Not every hypothesis deserves space. Not every impulse to control deserves obedience. You need to begin governing your attention, because what you repeatedly give attention to begins to govern your inner state. If you constantly give attention to what you do not control, your peace will begin to unravel. If you constantly give attention to what you can do now, your mind begins to find ground, and that ground matters, because without inner ground, any outer variation becomes an earthquake. An unanswered message becomes collapse. A change of plan becomes threat. A criticism becomes identity. A loss becomes the end of yourself. A mistake becomes a sentence. An unforeseen event becomes proof of incapacity. But when there is inner ground, everything changes. It still hurts. It still affects. It still disorganizes you for a moment, but it does not drag you away completely. You can feel without sinking. You can suffer without dissolving. You can cross through without losing direction. That is real strength. Not the noisy strength of someone trying to dominate everything, but the quiet strength of someone who knows how to remain standing even when they do not dominate. And that strength is built in small gestures. When you stop yourself from sending that impulsive message, when you accept that another person's silence is a fact, not an endless puzzle, when you do what must be done without demanding a guaranteed outcome, when you refuse to turn a mistake into identity, when you notice the need for approval and do not kneel before it, when you interrupt a mental narrative before it becomes torment, when you choose to return to the present instead of continuing to fight what does not yield. That is how the soul is educated, not in one grand dramatic moment, but in the repetition of these small returns to lucidity. Because in the end, what Stoicism teaches is not a technique of insensibility. It is an art of repositioning consciousness. It is learning to say, I cannot control the reaction, but I can control the intention. I cannot control time, but I can control consistency. I cannot control opinion, but I can control integrity. I cannot control loss, but I can control how I walk through loss. I cannot control the world, but I can work not to lose myself within it. Keep that sentence. It may be one of the most important to this video. My job is not to control the world. My job is not to lose myself within it. Because when you lose yourself, anything can dominate you. Any look destabilizes you. Any delay disturbs you. Any change frightens you. Any silence wounds you. Any frustration disorganizes you. But when you are grounded in yourself, the world still affects you. Yet it no longer kidnaps you, that does not mean indifference. It means center. Center is a powerful word, because the person who has center does not need everything to be stable. They only need to remember where their posture rests. And here comes a delicate and deep point. Sometimes, the true suffering is not losing control. It is discovering that it never existed in the way you imagined. That hurts the ego, because the ego wants centrality. It wants dominion. It wants to feel that with enough intelligence, enough effort, or enough sensitivity, it can shape life. But life always exposes our limitation. It exposes it when someone leaves without our permission, when the body gets sick, when time changes what seemed fixed, when a season ends, when recognition does not come, when another person chooses something that will not include you, when death enters the scene, when human fragility appears without asking permission. In those moments, two postures are possible. Either you harden into revolt and keep demanding from reality an impossible submission, or you accept the human condition. You'll recognize fragility without humiliating yourself. You'll recognize limits without feeling smaller. You'll recognize impermanence without turning it into despair. The second posture is much harder, but it is also the only one that generates lasting peace. Because peace is not born from the fantasy of omnipotence. It is born from reconciliation with reality. And maybe this is one of the most beautiful meanings of maturity. To stop interpreting limitation as humiliation. You are limited. So am I. We all are. We do not control tomorrow. We do not control others. We do not control time. We do not control death. We do not control what already was. We do not control the totality of outcomes. But within that limitation, there is immense greatness. The greatness of inner choice. The greatness of posture. The greatness of not corrupting yourself. The greatness of acting with dignity, even without guarantee. The greatness of remaining lucid in the middle of chaos. The greatness of not worsening your own pain with fantasy, resentment, and compulsion for control. That greatness is possible for anyone, but it requires training. It requires stopping the feeding of certain mental habits. The habit of taking everything personally. The habit of turning uncertainty into total threat. The habit of seeking safety and control of the external. The habit of reliving the past as if it was still editable. The habit of demanding from the future a guarantee it cannot give. The habit of monitoring others instead of building yourself. The habit of depending on approval to sustain. That last one is especially devastating, because when your self-esteem depends on other people's response, you become a slave to unstable variables. Praise lifts you. Criticism knocks you down. Attention calms you. Distance disorganizes you. Validation energizes you. Lack of validation empties you. That is not peace. That is emotional dependence on inconsistency. The Stoic path here is deeply liberating. Your value cannot depend entirely on other people's gaze. Your character cannot be outsourced. Your integrity cannot be negotiated in order to buy acceptance. You do not control whether everyone will like you, but you do control how many times you will abandon yourself trying to be accepted. You do not control whether you will be understood, but you do control whether you will remain honest. You do not control whether the world will applaud, but you do control whether you will continue doing what you consider right. That produces a much more solid not an inflated self-esteem, but a rooted one, based less on external reflection and more on fidelity to your own conscience. And when that grows, life takes on another weight, or rather, it loses an unnecessary weight, because you stop running after impossible emotional guarantees. You stop demanding universal approval. You stop begging for permanence. You stop negotiating principles for validation. You begin to understand that your center cannot live in other people's hands. That understanding changes relationships. It changes the way you work. It changes the way you position yourself. It changes the way you suffer. It even changes the way you love. Because to love with maturity is to offer without trying to possess. It is to care without trying to govern. It is to desire reciprocity without turning it into a secret contract. It is to recognize the value of encounter without turning the other person into the guarantor of your inner stability. When this is lacking, love becomes a field of control. When this matures, love becomes a space of presence. But all of this begins with an intimate decision to stop fighting against what is not yours. And I know that sentence sounds simple, but it is demanding. Because to stop fighting against what is not yours means to stop asking for explanation where there may never be explanation. It means to stop demanding perfect closure. It means to bear the emptiness of not knowing. It means to admit that some pains will be crossed without a final answer. It means to let go of the fantasy that all suffering can be solved by thought. This renunciation is painful at first, but deeply healing afterward, because thought stops being a courtroom and becomes a tool again. The mind stops being a battlefield and becomes a home again. You stop using consciousness to persecute yourself and begin using it to orient yourself. And then an essential question arises. If I stop trying to control what I cannot, what do I do with the energy that remains? That is the best part. You will return that energy to what really matters, to your character, to your discipline, to your body, to your word, to your silence, to your work, to your attention, to your capacity to go through the day with more presence, to your responsibility for the way you react, to your ability to interrupt mental excess, to the cultivation of a cleaner inner life. This is where philosophy stops being speech and becomes practice. There is no point agreeing with all this and continuing to feed the same impulses. There is no point finding Epictetus beautiful while still trying to manage everyone's heart. There is no point admiring Marcus Aurelius while still handing your mood over to the randomness of every little event. There is no point talking about peace while living in permanent worship of anxiety. At your summy point, there has to be decision. The decision not to answer everything. The decision not to interpret everything. The decision not to explain yourself to those who have already chosen not to understand. The decision not to pursue artificial closure. The decision not to turn expectation into tyranny. The decision to return to yourself when the mind wants to run after the impossible. These decisions seem small, but they reorganize an entire life because the mind gets used to what you repeat. If you repeat despair, it learns despair. If you repeat lucidity, it learns lucidity. If you repeat dependence on control, it becomes even more anxious. If you repeat return to the essential, it gains sobriety. That is why training matters so much. Maybe from now on, your exercise should be this. Every time something disturbs you, instead of immediately diving into reaction, ask, is this under my responsibility or only under my desire? Is there something concrete to be done? Or am I only trying to anesthetize my powerlessness with thought? What here belongs to me? What here do I need to accept? What here is duty? What here is attachment? These questions prevent many unnecessary falls. They do not remove all pain, but they remove confusion. And sometimes what destroys us most is not the pain, it is the confusion. Confusion between acting and controlling, between loving and humiliating yourself, between prudence and anxiety, between responsibility and omnipotence, between persistence and denial, between hope and refusal of reality. A clear mind suffers better, and that is a great victory. Yes, suffers better, because to live is also, at times, to suffer. But to suffer better means not turning every impact into identity, every loss into the end of the world, every frustration into proof of worthlessness. It means knowing how to say, this hit me, but it does not define me. This hurts, but it does not destroy me. This escaped my control, but my posture still belongs to me. This went away, but I do not need to leave myself as well. That last sentence deserves to stay. There are people who, in the face of a loss, also lose themselves. In the face of rejection, they surrender their own dignity. In the face of a mistake, they abandon their own confidence. In the face of change, they forget their own direction. But it does not have to be that way. You can lose something without losing your center. You can cry without disintegrating. You can be disappointed without becoming cynical. You can fail without becoming small. You can watch the external slip away and still keep inner government. That is silent strength, and it can be built. At the end of the day, suffering over what you never could control is a form of wasting life, because you give hours, days, energy, presence, and dignity to a war that was lost before it began. You try to change what does not change. You try to guarantee what was never guaranteed. You try to force flow into becoming stone. You ask permanence from what was born transient. And while you do that, real life is passing possible life. Concreti life. The life that could be inhabited with more awareness, more depth, more sobriety. Maybe your liberation begins when you stop asking, how do I control this? And begin asking, how do I keep from losing myself before this? That is the right question, because there will always be something out of place. There will always be something outside the plan. There will always be something outside your reach. But that does not mean everything has to become inner chaos. You can learn to create order within. You can learn to filter what deserves attention. You can learn to sustain the present without being kidnapped by imagination. You can learn to tolerate uncertainty without turning it into despair. You can learn to feel without dramatizing. You can learn to accept without morally. You can learn to move forward without needing to control every step of the road. And when that happens, something very beautiful is born. A less theatrical peace, less euphoric, less dependent on circumstance, a more adult peace, more silent, more firm, more rooted. The peace of someone who has understood that absolute control was never the condition for serenity. Serenity is born from discernment. It is born from discipline. It is born from humility before what does not depend on us. It is born from the courage to govern oneself instead of demanding government over the world. That is the point. Maybe your suffering is not asking for more effort. Maybe it is asking for more surrender to the real. Not cowardly surrender, but lucid surrender. The surrender of someone who stops punching water, who stops shouting at time, who stops begging life to become predictable before finally beginning to live. Life will not become fully predictable, but your mind can become more stable. Others will not always act as you wish, but your posture can become cleaner. The future will not present itself without risk, but your heart can learn not to kneel before fear. That is what matters. So from today on, every time you feel your mind tightening, wanting to grab, insist, predict, correct, monitor, control, breathe, and remember. Not everything that affects me belongs to me. Not everything that hurts requires that I fight. Not everything I lose diminishes me. Not everything that changes threatens me. Not everything that escapes my command escapes meaning. Sometimes life is only teaching you to let go. Sometimes life is only teaching you limits. Sometimes life is only destroying an illusion in order to strengthen a consciousness, and maybe that consciousness is exactly what was missing for you to stop surviving in tension and begin living with more clarity. Stop suffering over what was never yours to control. Stop calling anxiety responsibility. Stop calling attachment love. Stop calling fear of acceptance strength. Stop calling obsessive vigilance care. Stop offering your peace and sacrifice in order to buy guarantees that never existed. Return to what is yours. Your intention, your posture, your character, your discipline, your word, your conscience, your presence, your ability to do what is right, even in the middle of uncertainty that is yours. And that is enough to begin rebuilding your center. In the end, emotional freedom is not making everything happen the way you want. It is not breaking every time. It does not. Maturity is not controlling life. It is sustaining yourself within it. Strength is not defeating every variable. It is not being defeated inwardly every time they change. And peace is not the world finally obeying. It is you finally stopping abandoning yourself, because it does not. If this video spoke to you, write in the comments the sentence you decide to carry with you from today forward. Share it with someone who is exhausted from trying to control everything and because of that, can no longer breathe in peace. Leave your like and stay here with us on the channel. Because sometimes the change the mind needs does not begin with more information, but with a truth spoken at the right moment.